Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. Let's rant with Scrapper. We are with Psyop, our level 30 Stalker. And we are on a story arc for Christine, so we're going to have some lower level enemies until we finish up with General Z. And so it'll be a little easy. There's really nothing we can do about that until we get off the story arc because it's a level 25 to 29 arc. And then we'll find something higher level to do. But this is not about so much about the missions and the story arcs. This is about ranting. And so today, what I'm going to talk about, I don't know that it's really a rant. Let's go through Brickstown. I don't know that it's really a rant, but I do want to talk about it because I think it might be potentially useful for game masters. I know that I struggled with this a lot, and my best friend is in a game where clearly the game master and the players are struggling with this a lot. And to some degree, there isn't a lot that the players can do about this, although they can a little bit. So let me start by talking about what my best friend mentioned as the problem that he's having in his Sunday afternoon game or whatever. And then I'll talk about what Guy from Great GM says about this. And without even being in his game, based on what Guy was saying, I feel like I've diagnosed the problem in his game and why it's boring. So, a couple of weeks ago, maybe before Christmas, I can't remember now. Some time ago, I was chatting with him over just sort of texting and stuff on Google Hangouts or whatever it's called now, Google Chat. And I asked him how his games are going, and he said that he was very unhappy with his Sunday afternoon game. He said it's boring. And so I asked him, well, why is it boring? And he said, oh, well, the GM is boring, the players are boring, it's all just boring. And after talking to him a little bit, it sounds like what's happened is that he and the other players are kind of stuck in this mode. And if you've played role-playing games for any length of time, you witness this either on one side of the screen or the other, where the players are kind of hemming and hawing over everything, and they're not. It's like taking them forever to make decisions, and the game just sort of bogs down because um, they're they're not sure what to do. They start talking each other out of good ideas, and bad ideas come in, and like, we're not sure. Should we attack through the side? Should we attack through the front? Should we get some more information? Maybe we should scout some more. And it ends up you were supposed to like go in, rescue the kidnapped victim, and come out, and it was supposed to be a one session adventure, and it ends up taking like 4 sessions because you guys can't make a decision. And so that can make the game feel like it's dragging. And he said something to that effect, that the players are taking forever to do things. I mean, my gosh, I don't know what he does with them, and he didn't do it too much in my Rome game. I think partially because, and here is General Z. Okay, but we're gonna take everybody out around him because we don't want him to get hurt, because he can get killed. Um, but man, I remember when we used to play Neverwinter Nights. I used to hate when we found shops because he could just take forever shopping. I don't know if he does this in real life. I haven't gone shopping with him in many, many years. He didn't used to when we were kids. But oh man, he is going to just go shopping for the most perfect of whatever it is, and try to get the most out of his gold pieces and get the right magic items. And oh, just you'll be there forever. I mean, if you give him a magic shop with a lot of inventory in it, and he will be playing around with that magic shop for an hour and a half. And there are other players like that too. You get 3 or 4, clothes horses and shopaholics in a single group, and you're going to be shopping for bloomin' ever. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it's not just shopping, of course. You can get players that'll really seek clues and unlock the back room. Maybe we should do all this and then come back and get him. Um, you'll get players who will take forever to decide, like I said, which side of the stronghold to sneak in on. You'll get players that'll take forever to decide how to approach talking to the king, and this can really bog the game down and make it not be fun, right? Because everybody's just sitting around talking about playing the game. They're not actually playing the game, right? Um, so, so the question becomes, how do you prevent that? Why does it happen, really, and how do you prevent it? Well, one of the reasons it happens is because you're playing a game, right? The players are gamers, and they're playing a game, and they're trying to optimize their gaming experience, right? It's like when you're playing the game of Risk and you're figuring out, okay, like which country should we attack? And so as gamers, instead of just playing their character out, right, they're trying to figure out how to do it. Like, what does the GM want us to do here? What's the best way to approach it? What's the best way to leverage our character sheets? And also, the player characters, like themselves, might not be sure what to do. A lot of times, they don't know what to do, and so that can do it also. But sometimes, even when they know what to do, they can talk themselves out of a good idea and into a bad idea, and they take forever to do it. Look at all these jump bots. This is cool. Um, and so um, this can really bog things down. And Matt Colville has a great video where he talks about this, and it's called Orcs Attack, which I can highly recommend. And in that video, he says what he usually does. What happens is the players get into analysis paralysis, right? They're talking about how to assault the stronghold, and they're just not sure what to do, or they can't decide whatever it is that they're doing. They're having trouble making the decisions, right? And so Colville said what he'll often do is he'll just have a band of orcs attack the party, right? And they go from sitting around talking about playing the game to actually playing the game. They have a combat, and then usually after the combat is over, they just make the decision that they were taking forever to make. Okay, let's just go do it, right? And I told the story a long time ago that I had something very much like this happen in my game when they were going to the shrine of the Kuo Toa, and it was this big shrine, and they looked through it using familiars and stuff, and they scouted it out, and they knew where everything was, and they knew what they had to do, and they came up with, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 possible plans to do it, and after having come up with the 4 or 5 plans, they couldn't. They then just kept rotating among the plans. So maybe we should do this. Well, actually, no. Maybe we should do this. Well, maybe we should. I think your first plan. And then they sort of decided on one, and then they talked themselves out of it, and they weren't sure what to do, right? And part of it was that they just weren't sure how powerful these Kuo Toa were. They'd never fought them, and so finally, I decided, okay, Orcs Attack, but it's going to be Kuo Toa, right? So I grabbed a band of Kuo Toa, and I said, um, everybody make a perception roll, and they made it. And I said, you hear it's like slapping of wet feet coming toward you, and they were like, okay, let's hide, and they hid in like the alcoves. And the Kuo Toa came down, they ambushed them, and they got into a fight. And my best friend said, oh, good, we can test ourselves against them, right? We're going to see how we perform against them, because they weren't sure. Like, one of the things that was fueling their uncertainty and their inability to decide was that they just weren't sure how tough these things were. I mean, yeah, he knew how tough, probably knew how tough the book said they were, but he didn't know how tough mine were, right? And so they got into this battle, and then they're like, okay, let's go with the original plan that they first came up with, that they thought was great, and then talked themselves out of and back into and back out of, and they just did it, right? And so, and I'm leaving General Z to the end because I don't want him to get killed. And so that method of Orcs Attack worked really, really well, and props to Colville for saying it. But the question is, why did Orcs attacking work? Right? I mean, we sort of have the specifics. They weren't sure. They tested themselves and so on. Why does it work? Well, what Guy says, and I think this is actually really important, is that there are 2 basic modes for the players to be operating in. And those 2 modes are acting and reacting. And he points out that when they're reacting, the players and the characters are generally not in control, right? Something is happening and they're reacting to it, right? Usually this puts them on some sort of a stricture. It might be a deadline, right? Or they might have to stop something, maybe not before time goes by, but before something else happens, or after something happens or whatever, but they're reacting to something that's going on in the environment. Okay? I still think when the door is open, it should reveal you, because didn't these guys just see the door open? You'd think they would have. And so the other mode, of course, that player characters can be in is acting, right? When they are in control, they're making the decisions, they're doing the things. I'm acting here, really. Okay? And so Guy's point, and I think this is actually really good, is that the play tends to bog down. He's talking about pacing, right? How do you pace your game? When the players are in control of the pace, the players are in control of their pace when they're doing the acting, right? That's when they control the pace, and that's when it can often bog down, right? Because they're not under any strictures, right? They're not under a time limit or something, so they can take as long as they want to discuss how to approach the Shrine of the Kuo Toa. They can take as long as they want to discuss how to get into the stronghold or rescue the princess or whatever it happens to be, okay? Because they're acting. Oh, this is where we learn about the nemesis. I don't know if I did this with my brute, who's now almost level 40. Are you going to come down here? Because I got to kill you, and it's just easier to kill you down here. Bye. And so when the players are reacting, right, the GM is basically giving them prompts of things to do, and then they react to it, right? Whereas when the players are acting, well, the GM's not giving them anything, sort of prompts or anything like that, and so it can bog down. So Guy's example is if they go to a library, well, you've got a book there for them to find, but who knows when they're going to find it, and in the meantime, they're acting, and it can, sort of bog down. So when this happens, he suggests, what you want to do is find a way to basically do something like Orcs Attack. He doesn't use that as an example, but I will. What Orcs Attack does, Colville's patented Orcs Attack, and what I did with the Kuo Toa, was you shift the players from the acting state to the reacting state. And that speeds the gameplay up because they're now under some sort of pressure, right? So like my guys weren't under time pressure, but they were under pressure not to let any of those Kuo Toa get away, right? As soon as the battle started, they knew, they tried to close off, right? They positioned themselves in several caves down the hallway, and like they had the tank fighters come in. Oh, we don't have to lead him out. They had the tank fighters come in, blocking the Kuo Toa's retreat, and then the rest of the characters were on the other side. So the Kuo Toa were basically surrounded or flanked or whatever you want to call it. It was like this, right? It was a tunnel going this way, and the Kuo Toa came down here, and then the fighter and the rogue came out here, and the other characters came out here, and they sandwiched the Kuo Toa in between them. And by doing that, they made it so they couldn't get away. And so that was a certain like pressure that was exerted on them to in terms of the story, because they couldn't, like, if they had allowed the Kuo Toa to escape, the Kuo Toa could have raised the alarm, right? And that would have meant that the whole base got alerted to them, and now they have to fight the whole base, right? And so if they're trying to avoid detection, then they have to make sure that they physically prevent the Kuo Toa from getting away from them and alerting the base. So there wasn't a time limit, but there was a space limit, right? Like they couldn't allow the Kuo Toa to go into a certain space, because if they get into a certain place, they could get away and raise the alarm. And so that shifted the mode from action to reaction. Let me check our context here and then we'll continue. Oh gosh, I started a story arc for this guy. I didn't mean to do that. Well, we'll do that another time. We've got Stemets, we've got Philippa, we've got Kendrick. Let's try Neil Kendrick. I haven't done him in a while, I think. So let's do Kendrick. So, so this is the way that Guy suggests, and to some degree what Colville was suggesting, and what I'm suggesting, to keep the pace up in your game is whenever possible, try and shift the mode that the characters are in from acting to reacting, right? Give them something to react to. So they go into the library and there's a book and they've got to examine shelf number 32 to get that book or whatever, and it's taken them forever. Something happens, right? I mean, the librarian comes in and says, "What are you doing in the restricted section? You're not supposed to be here. Do you have a permission slip?" Right? We're just thinking Harry Potter. Now we're reacting, right? If you think about like the first Harry Potter book, the Philosopher's or the Sorcerer's Stone, he's acting. He goes into the restricted section. He's got all the time in the world because he's invisible, right? And then he pulls a book out of the restricted section, and the book starts screaming and making noise. And now he's reacting. Now he has to run. He has to hide. He has to avoid Professor Snape and all of this stuff. And so, yes, we're just going to have to do this mission because they want you to. And so he's now reacting, right? And the pace goes up. Now, you can't have it be that they're always reacting. I can't remember which book on writing this was, but I remember the one author talking about the scene and sequel process. You have the scene of the tension and whatever, and then there's a sequel where you like relax things, right? You're sort of letting, you're sort of like taking a deep breath after the tension before you raise the tension up again. It can't be all reaction all the time, right? Sometimes the player should be in the acting mode rather than reacting. And they shouldn't always be out of control. But if you look at, say, a typical, like the original Star Wars movies, most of those movies are the characters reacting rather than acting, right? And so those movies are very fast-paced, and they have a lot of tension and excitement, and people love them in part because the characters are sort of constantly in a reacting mode, reacting to whatever the next disaster was, right? They're on Hoth, they get probe droids, they're reacting to the probe droids. They finish reacting to the probe droids, now the Empire shows up, they're reacting to that. They have to flee. They flee in the Millennium Falcon, then the hyperdrive doesn't work. Now they're reacting to that. They flee. They hide in the asteroid field, and so on and so forth. And so that reaction keeps the pace going, right? And the same thing happens in a role-playing game. So if you want to keep the pace up, it's fine, and you should let the players act. But if it takes too long and it starts feeling like it's bogging down, you should do something that forces them to react to it, right? And that will get the tension back up and make the pace faster and make it more exciting, right? It's more exciting to the players when they have to react to something than when they're just planning something out and acting. They tend to really get into analysis paralysis, gamers, when they're doing the acting and the planning. And to avoid that, you need to introduce something that they don't control. If you're not sure how to do this, one thing you could try, and in fact, Trevor Duvall just recently released a review of the new edition. But one thing you could try is Mythic Game Master Emulator, also called the GME. They just released a second edition of it that looks quite good. I can't speak for myself because I don't have it, but Trevor reviewed it, and it looked really good when he was reviewing it. But the first one is really good at this because, as you're doing scenes, right, there's like a 50-50 chance if you roll that there's going to be a random event during the start of a scene that it will be an interrupt. And the interrupt scene will do something random and will throw a monkey wrench into the works. and basically it can force you into a reaction mode. So one thing I would suggest is if you get the Mythic GME, either edition, and just maybe, and I don't know, not everybody is comfortable. I'm not necessarily comfortable rolling random events at the table because like my players are going to want to know, what are you rolling? I'm going to get bogged down in that. I'm not going to be listening to what they're saying because I'm trying to figure this out. What I would suggest is maybe come up with a handful of interrupt scenes. Like use the GME rules perhaps to roll up a dozen interrupt scenes. And the interrupt scenes are generic, right? It'll just be, move away from a thread. I don't know if you're going to use threads while you're doing this. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But we're going to try to get rid of this mission because I hate these. What you can do is randomly roll up some scene events, right? NPC negative action and meaning says like heal the sick or whatever. Figure out what that might mean, and then just jot that down as something that could interrupt them, right? And then once you have like a half a dozen of these, if you see the action bogging down, you can pull out your index card with one of these interrupt scenes and just start to run the interrupt, right? Well, while you guys are doing this, all of a sudden you hear a crash of glass and something is going on in the tavern next door. And it sounds like fighting, right? And then they go investigate that, and now they're in a tavern brawl. And that could potentially make it interesting and increase the pace because now they're reacting to something instead of stuck in analysis paralysis. So we're doing free show. How much time have we got done here? It's only 22 minutes. So, yeah, I would definitely say that is a good technique. You don't need Mythic GM Emulator. You can use random tables. I mean, Ultimate Toolbox has some really cool random tables that you can use. I think Tome of Adventure Design has some that you can use. You can use the Book of Random Tables. You could just have like a little old lady show up and ask them to do a quest for her. I mean, there are any number of things that you can do to interrupt. If it's champions, for example, have a hunted show up, right? All the characters have hunted DNPCs, right? Hunteds and DNPCs. So they're all in the base talking, right? Let's say assuming it's a known headquarters, and all of a sudden they hear sirens and screaming on the street, and one of the hunteds shows up in the street outside the base and challenges whoever he's hunting, to a duel. And if you don't come out, I'm going to shoot this little kid that I've got kidnapped, right? And if you come out, I'll let her go. And now the superheroes are reacting, right? And that will immediately speed up the scene. It doesn't have to be combat, right? But you do something to interrupt what they're doing and force them to react to it. The Justice League is all sitting around talking about their plan and what to do next, and they're sitting there for an hour and a half, and the GM's looking at his watch. So, okay, Lois Lane calls up Superman, thinking he's Clark Kent, says, "Hey, Clark, I'm going to investigate this warehouse that you and I think is being used by LexCorp. Are you going to come with me?" And now Superman has to make a decision, right? He has to react. Is he going to go with Lois? If he doesn't go with Lois, you're guaranteed she's a DMPC. She's going to get kidnapped, captured, get into trouble, mind control, something, right? On the other hand, if he leaves, what is the rest of the Justice League going to do, right? So now they have to react to it. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be combat. In fact, I would say it often oughtn't to be automatic, immediate combat, but it's something that the players have to react to that knocks them out of their comfort zone, right? Their sort of ability to just set their own pace. Because if you let the players set their own pace, they will be very deliberative. and very careful and very cautious, and they will check. They'll dot every I and they'll cross every T. And doing that may lead to success, but it's not very exciting, right? It's much more interesting and exciting if you if you don't have the time and the luxury of crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's because things are going too fast, right? Think Raiders of the Lost Ark. Let's get this guy. Is he going to come back? Indiana Jones is constantly reacting to a crisis, right? He's almost never in control, right? The few times it seems like he's in control, like when he's on the ship with Marion and she hits him with the mirror and stuff. The few times it seems like he's in control, the Nazis show up, Belloc shows up, something happens, the monkey gets killed by a date, right? And he's reacting again. And um, so anytime you feel like the pace is slowing down and things are getting kind of bogged down, that's a good time to interrupt things and shake things up. And so that's kind of what Guy from Great GM's talking about his video. Can't remember what it's titled, but it's one of his more recent ones. Oh, about the things that kills. It's something like what this is the thing that kills most D&D games. What kills them is the slow pace, right? People get bored. Think about my best friend. He was almost considering quitting that D&D game, which he's been in for months, because it was boring. Apparently, what happened is the original GM was a paid GM. He did Waterdeep. After he left, the rest of the players wanted to keep playing, so one of the others took over. I don't know if anybody new joined, but one of the others took over and was a pretty good GM. And my best friend was playing a wizard or something, and was having a lot of fun. It was like his favorite character. It's one of his favorite campaigns. He was very much enjoying it and looking forward to leveling that character up. I guess it was going to be a 1 to 20 campaign. I don't know, level 1 to 20. Apparently what happened at some point along the way is that GM said, I can't run anymore, or I can't run for a while. And one of the other players took over, and the GM is still playing, but he's not running. This is sort of like my best friend when he took over my when he ran Candlekeep when I needed to take a break. And I guess this other GM is not very good at pacing and isn't doing anything to interrupt when the players bog down, and the players are bogging down a lot. And so it was getting boring, right? And I think what my best friend was saying is sort of like, if this keeps up, I'm going to leave, because just like it's not any fun. It's boring. And he said it's just, the players just are bogging everything down, and the GM, I guess, isn't doing anything to keep the pacing up. And but then he told me the other day that the other GM, the better one. You okay there? All right. The other GM is coming back, I guess, in a few weeks. And so he's just going to stick until the old GM comes back, right? Not the original GM, that was the paid guy. He's gone, but the other GM. He's going to stick until that one comes back, and then he's anticipating that it will get better. What's interesting, right, as I was talking to him about this, I said, is it the same players? He said, well, other than the DM swap, right, where one of the DMs is now the player and the player is the DM, yeah, all the players are the same. And I said, well, do you guys bog down in the other game with the other GM? And he said, no, just the current one. And so he was sort of blaming the GM for it. And I said to him, well, it's really not the GM's fault, and it's not entirely, but in a sense it is, right? Because I think probably if you were to analyze this, my guess would be that the difference isn't the players, right? Because it's the same players, or how they play. It's that the previous GM, the better GM, right, probably is keeping them more, whether on purpose or whether just by instinct or because that's the way his campaign was designed, he's keeping the players in a more reactive mode. And because they're in a reactive mode, they can't bog the game down with the indecision, right? Because they are not able to be indecisive because they're reacting. Are you coming after me? That's an ambush? Are you kidding me? Cool. Where are you? See, this guy? Buddy, stay put and I'll assassinate you and I'll put you out of your misery. Let me put you out of my misery here. Here you go. There we go. Um, so yeah, this is my. I guess this is going to be fairly short compared to most of my rants, but this is the advice that several of us have for you now, whether it's Guy or me or Matt Colville. Um, keep the if you want to keep the pace feeling quick, and you don't want the game to bog down into this constant analysis paralysis and sort of the players dragging things out, trying to cross every T and dot every I and go into every little nook and cranny of the dungeon to search out every little thing. If you don't want it to bog down like that, the best way to prevent that is to switch them, shift them from an action mode to a reaction mode. Give them something, an interrupt scene, and something that they don't control. Force them to react to it. Put them under pressure. And the pressure makes it interesting. Matt Colville talks about what he calls putting a gun on the table, right? So he said, you have two characters conversing. If they're just conversing, it might be pretty boring. Now one of them reaches into his pocket, pulls out a gun, and puts a gun on the table. Now all of a sudden it's an interesting scene. There's pressure here, right? What is that gun on the table for? What's he going to use it for? The other character now has to react to the gun being on the table. Oh, ambush. And it's a white con. That's pretty sad. Seriously, one guy? Oh, no. Here's the other one. Yeah, you're going to get zapped. Yeah, you guys are idiots. Right past the police drone. This is, by the way, guys, this is why I always start and end episodes or sessions at a train station. Because the train station will protect you if you get ambushed while you're logging out. Anyway, so back to the wrap up. If your game needs to get sped up, if you feel like it's bogging down, if you feel like it's boring, the players are getting bored, you're getting bored, the best way to fix that is to interrupt what's going on and take the characters from an action mode to a reaction mode. Force them to put the gun on the table, right? Force them to react to something dangerous or with time pressure or with some other constraint where they don't have the luxury of just sitting around planning forever, right? Take that luxury of no pressure. We can do it however we want at our convenience. Take that luxury away and put pressure on them. Time pressure is a really good way to do it, but it doesn't have to be that. Put pressure on them so that they will have to react, and that speeds up the play. It makes everything feel faster. Even though combat can take a long time, right? It might take an hour to resolve the combat, but everything feels like it just sped up because we're reacting now and we're under pressure, and it makes the pacing go faster than it would if you just leave us with our luxury to take as much time as we want to plan everything out. So I think that's really good advice, and it's definitely something I'm going to keep in my mind. And again, you don't have to randomly roll stuff at the table. You can have some pre-scripted encounters. Wandering monsters is a great technique from the old dungeon days. Why do you think that was there? Because it puts pressure on the party, right? Every hour, I think, you rolled a wandering monster check, right? It was like something like roll a d8. If you roll a 1, there's a wandering monster. So you can't just take 24 hours to examine a room, because there's going to be 24 random. You're going to get hit by random wandering monsters 3 or 4 times, right? In an old school D&D, you couldn't just take a long rest and get all your hit points back. You took a rest and you got 1 hit point back, right? And so players knew there's a time pressure when you're in the dungeon. The longer you're here, the more chance there is that some monster is going to find you and attack you at random. And so you have to be efficient and quick. You have to be careful. Like if you're making a lot of noise, busting open doors, that increases the wandering monster check from 1 in 8 to 2 and 8 or something like that, right? And so you had to control what you were doing, and you were constantly under pressure. Essentially, the whole time you were in the dungeon was sort of a reaction phase, right? You weren't in the action phase. You were in the reacting. You were reacting to the dungeon. This is why Matt Colville calls it sort of a survival horror. What is survival horror? You're constantly reacting. You're never in an action mode. That's kind of the way survival horror works, right? When you leave the dungeon, you go to the town and you're shopping and you're resting and you're leveling up. That's the action mode, right? And that can really bog down. And you could end up spending a whole session in town getting nothing accomplished but shopping and leveling up, which you should be able to do in 20 minutes because players, oh, do I want to take this spell or this spell? Let me read up on both of these spells. Oh, wait, there's this other spell you could take. Oh, really? I've never heard of that one. Let me read up on that one. And an hour went by, right? And you're still picking spells. And so when that happens, you got to find some way to shift it into the reaction mode. The mentor shows up and says, I am going to take 2 of these spells back. You pick it now, or I'm going to take them, right? And force them into a reaction mode. I'm not trying to say you want to ruin the players leveling up. I usually say do that in between sessions, right? This way, take as long as you want to figure it out, but don't do it in the middle of a session because that bogs things down. And I would say the same thing with shopping. A great way to make sure the shopping doesn't bog things down is email the players a list of everything available in the shops and what it costs, and say to them, let them make a blanket persuade check or something, and if they succeed, knock 10% off all the prices and say, we're not going to role play negotiations. Here's a list of all the shops and what's available and how much it costs. Decide what you want, spend the gold, put it on your character sheet, tell me so I can cross it off the list, do it in between sessions, and we come back, you've got all your items, right? That, leveling up off screen, shopping off screen, all that stuff, try to push as much of that off screen as possible because that's not playing the game, right? Shopping isn't playing the game. It's just bogging it down. And you want to put them into a reaction mode, right? If you do have to role play the shopping, make a reaction out of it. You walk into a shop owner and he's like being robbed, and now they have to react to the thieves. Better watch out. There's a powerful thieves guild in this town, so if you stop the thieves, now you just made enemy of the thieves guild. And now you're really going to be reacting every time you walk down the street, right? And so that then turns it from just a boring shopping expedition to a whole adventure. So whenever you get a chance, you want to minimize the action mode and maximize the reaction, because even though, and I know it sounds like you're taking agency away from the players, right? Their agency, most people interpret, go back and watch my agency video way at the beginning of this live stream, or this playlist. It feels like you're taking agency away because when they're in the action mode, they're in control and they're deciding what to do. But the problem is, when you give the players that agency, or not really agency, but that control, they don't know what to do with it. And they often will just sit around, and it's fine if they're sitting around role-playing and they're having fun, but if they're in this sort of analysis paralysis, they can't figure out what to do, they're taking forever to decide what to buy and all that stuff, that is just going to make the game boring for everybody. So you've got to push them out of that. And the best way to do that is to put them in a reaction mode. They still have agency in reaction mode, guys. They're still deciding what to do, and there are still consequences to those decisions. It's just that they don't have the luxury of taking forever to make the decision. They're on the clock, whether it's an actual time clock or some other sort of pressure. They're under pressure, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's what keeps it from being boring. So always turn the screws, put them under pressure, make them react, and that will keep the game interesting. As much as possible, shift it to reaction mode. So hopefully that will help. Anybody who's having trouble where you feel like the game is bogging down or the pacing is off or you're boring your players, switch it to a reaction mode, and that will help. And again, watch Colville's Orcs Attack. Watch Great GM's video on the main thing that kills a D&D game, which is boredom, right? And both of those will be helpful, and hopefully this video was helpful. And until next time, I am Scrapper Lock, and this is Let's Rant with Scrapper on the Rebirth server.